Welcome to the DFO Rundown Podcast with Frank Saravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com. Delivered by DoorDash.
Welcome to episode 85, the Peter Klima edition of the DFO Rundown. I'm Jason Gregor alongside Frank Saravalli. Frank, how you doing?
I'm good. Did anything happen this weekend?
Oh, geez, lots going on, man. Peter Klima ties into a lot of different topics that we want to touch on.
That's a name I haven't heard in like 20 years.
Dude, still one of the greatest lines ever. You know when he scored that huge goal in the 1990 Stanley Cup Finals after being on the bench and he was asked about it, he just says, "You need a pretty long stick to score from the bench." Oh, it's still a classic. And he had one of the greatest / worst helmets of all time. That's what I always remember about Peter.
The only thing I remember about Peter Klima is like NHL 94 playing for the Tampa Bay Lightning, him and Darren Pupa.
Yeah, he had sick skill when he wanted to be, man. Oh, he was talented, dude. Talented guy. The Vancouver Canucks, Frank, their coaches, you had everything out in the public, before the Canucks announced anything from their head coach, and all of it was accurate. So what do you make of that? Is that just today's day and age and, great insiders, or is that an error on the part of the Canucks?
I honestly am kind of, for a move that we knew wasn't surprising, like we had sensed was coming, I'm surprised how it played out and that it still was rather sloppy. And in calling around to people around the league as it was happening, they were like, yeah, what do you like? This is just another day that ends in Y for the Vancouver Canucks organization. I think maybe what's most fascinating is that since management is not the one that hired Bruce Boudreau, it's the fact that ownership feels compelled or has the ability or the wherewithal or the knowledge to feel like they can go out and hire a coach in the marketplace. And that would be a major red flag or alarm for me if I was the next general manager to be going into Vancouver. Is why is it that ownership is hiring a coach? That seems to be, one step out of place. And look, I get it. They own the team. They foot the bill. They can do whatever they want. It just, for a team that's had a reputation for an ownership that meddles in their day-to-day operations, Francesco Aquilini has not been a stranger to come down to the locker room between periods every now and again. Things like that, I don't know. It leaves kind of an uneasy feeling, I think, if you were to be the person that's going in there next.
It's a fair point.
And we should probably recap the changes just in case anyone's listening and is either just getting it or just understanding what's happening. The Canucks wholesale changes overnight. Jim Benning, the GM, the assistant GM, John Weisbrod also out. Head coach Travis Green out, along with assistant Nolan Baumgartner. And what's significant to your point, Jason, is that all of this was announced or broken with the beginning of the next coach of the Vancouver Canucks is going to be Bruce Boudreau, which again, it just seems out of place.
Yeah, that part I found quite odd. Now, good for Bruce, one of the greatest memes in NHL history online. I absolutely love it. The darn
which one? There's so many.
He's got so many. And Bruce is, well, we've had Bruce on the pod here. He is such a character. It was interesting. Last week he was on, and not our pod, but and he was asked about, would you be open to coaching? He's like, man, I've always wanted to coach in a Canadian market, and I love Vancouver. And so I remember reading his response. I was like, obviously you put your name out there, but it seemed like really directly related to Vancouver even a week ago. So obviously there might have even been some discussions maybe then. Like, I doubt this is a 24-hour conversation. Do you?
No, I mean, the rumor the entire time was the Vancouver Canucks had already had their next coach lined up before they got back from their road trip. And I think the problem was they had won 2 games in a row to close out the trip in Eastern Canada. And all of a sudden, not anyone's thinking that this team's going to go on a run, but it maybe felt like a little bit of an odd time getting your first back-to-back wins in 6 weeks to then fire Travis Green as soon as the team gets home. And I think what you saw play out on Saturday night against Pittsburgh just a lifeless, listless loss. And you see the fan throw the jersey on the ice, the fire Benning chant, the sell the team chant, all that stuff, I think, plays into something that's set in motion on Sunday, feeling like they had to pull the trigger and get something done. Now, what's interesting to me about Boudreau is this is sort of a temporary audition. He's the interim guy without really being the interim guy, because he only has basically now a year and a half, a year and 3/4 on his contract. That's all that he's signed up for in Vancouver. And so, it's interesting at 66, maybe it's something soon to be 67 that he's comfortable with, saying, look, at this stage in my career, I just want to get back behind the bench. I don't care how long my contract says, but basically you're coming in knowing that, your shelf life or your expiration date may be coming up in short order, which some guys would find uncomfortable. Others would say, yeah, whatever, it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, I would think Bruce at his age and with his experience, he's like, man, you can get fired if you've got 2 years left on a contract. You know what? I agree with you, Frank. I think this is one where, because we talked about it with him, and he said he wanted to get back into coaching. It's something he loves and cares about. So here's the thing. I think if you look at this roster, and if Bruce Boudreau comes in and Vancouver has a better record than they had prior, which won't be overly difficult to achieve, and they
shouldn't be,
and have a good year next year, well, then it's probably easy. And he goes for
extension time
contracts.
Right.
Yeah, easy. So and the other thing is, to your original point, it would be even harder, I think, to attract a GM, and maybe not, if the head coach had such a long tenure. At least this gives the option that the GM, because the GM's going to come in here now.
But they usually want their guy. That's the point, is why are you already kind of, not to say that Bruce Boudreau can't mesh with anyone, but why would you want to put a GM in a spot where one of the first things they want to do when they set foot in the door is to axe the coach?
Yeah, wow. Probably, yeah. No, I agreed, which is why I think they gave him a short-term contract. So they'll say, hey, let's work with this. There is only 32 NHL GM jobs at the end of the day. And I think that there'll be a lot of people interested, which leads me to the next question, Frank. Who's at the top of the list for GMs?
I guess it depends on how you want to structure your organization. Like, are we going back to the president of hockey ops? Or are we going all-encompassing GM, who is sort of the one man in charge? Like, it's certainly been it's been en vogue to be hiring the president of hockey ops of late. You see Montreal, this is actually the second Sunday in a row that we had a GM change in the NHL. But to me, I think they've been in conversation with a number of different people that could facilitate that type of role in recent days and or weeks. I mentioned on the Daily Faceoff show the idea that I think Dale Talon's name had surfaced at a certain point. Jim Rutherford's name had surfaced at a certain point. It's always, difficult to cut through fact and fiction when it comes to this. The Aquilinis play their cards pretty close to the vest, the Bruce Boudreau news notwithstanding. And, I think that Chris Gear is going to get a long look. I think Ryan Johnson, they're going to be involved in collaborating with Stan Smeal as he's the guy that's ultimately wearing the interim GM hat. And it's really in a lot of ways to quell some of the fears and or cries in the market that, hey, let's put someone who's a legendary player in our town. Let's put him in charge, and that'll calm things down for a little bit until we can get to where we want to go. But I do think that Ryan Johnson is really well respected. He's been the GM in Abbotsford, a younger guy that's sort of grown through the ranks with this team and organization. And, I think he's going to get a long look. Do you put in someone in place in the president of hockey ops job to help grow with him? Or do you just go out and hire someone, sort of from the outside? I'd imagine there's been talk, and I'm sure the rumors will grow loud, of Toronto assistant general manager Lawrence Gilman, who was previously there under the Mike Gillish regime. There was a report on Sunday night that the Vancouver Canucks could bring back former front office member George McPhee. I don't have any knowledge of that to my understanding. I'm just kind of predicting the names that we'll likely hear and see out there at some point. A lot of people forget that George McPhee worked in the Canucks front office way back when. So I think there's lots of options. Mark Bergevin's name will probably surface at some point. My guess is him having worked in the Canadian market and having seen, getting it in 2 languages, it might seem like a treat just getting it in 1 at a certain point. But I don't know. My guess is he'd probably be destined for somewhere in the U.S. after taking a little time for himself.
What about the 2 senior advisors to the general manager currently in Vancouver, and Henrik and Daniel Sedin? Not as GMs, I don't think they have enough experience, but do you think there's a chance as do you see their role expanding with this change?
I don't, not for now. They're really just getting their feet wet, and they were obviously interesting additions to the staff. And I think everyone was kind of curious what it would be like and what it would ultimately grow towards. I think they still have young families, still understanding how the front office side of things works. I don't see it yet, but I think, maybe it sounds weird to say it like this, but maybe one more cycle through that, then they might be ready, but I don't think they're there yet.
I wonder, because the temperature in Vancouver is pretty hot right now. The fan base is upset.
But it cools off in a hurry, though.
I get it, but I just sometimes people nowadays look for things that will appease people that are being frustrated and calm them down. And I look at the I'm not even sure if appease.
Did you mean acquiesce?
Yeah.
What was it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's terrible.
Acquiesce. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
that's a new one for me.
Yeah, they're trying to calm down the waters. I was trying to mix. I'm pulling the strutty right there. I'm just mixing up words that aren't even words.
I love it.
Early in the morning. And I just wonder if you see some sort of title change, Frank, that makes, the Sedins are more involved, because they are so respected in that fan base, not so much for what they did off the ice as much, but also everything they do in that community. They're beloved, and rightfully so.
I know.
And so I wonder from a PR standpoint, if you see even a subtle change in what their role is and how that's perceived in Vancouver.
It's a dumb thing, but what would you even call their titles? Could they be co-general manager? What would that ultimately look like? You can't do one and not the other, just like you can't put one in the Hall of Fame without the other. So I don't know. It's I'd be surprised if there's a significant change. I'll put it that way.
Okay. And just to clarify, it's currently 7:19 Mountain Time, 9:19 Eastern Time. And the Vancouver Canucks website still has all of the Jim Benning and everybody, Travis Green. They're all still on the website, which is a little odd, but nonetheless.
Tell their webmaster to get after it.
Yeah, so it's just kind of,
even though it's 6 a.m. in the morning Pacific time.
But they had it, when this announcement came out, man, it was coming out at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, it was very, I got to tell you, from a reporting perspective, this was a wacky one to work on, because everyone went dark. I don't know if they had threatened people in terms of their contracts. Hey, we won't, I'm just speculating, but usually at some point, especially given the number of bodies thrown on the tarmac here, at some point, one of them surfaces and says, at least privately, off the record, quietly to someone, yes, I was fired, and, here are the other people that are going with me. It never happened. There were, you could go back and look at all the reporting. It was very quiet in terms of primary sources. I think a lot of people had very similar info and were told similar things, but, as a reporter, death and firings, 2 things I don't mess around on. So, wasn't going to step out on the ledge, even though those were the 4 guys that I had heard maybe an hour or an hour and a half before it came out. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, well, Frank, the interesting thing for me, I wasn't really on social media yesterday. And when I got to the Oiler game and I'm sitting there and I pop up and I see Friedman saying that Bruce Boudreau is the new coach of Vancouver, and I was like, oh, gee, I didn't even hear they fired their coach. So then I go back and I'm looking and I'm like, well, no one has it. They fired their other coach. It's just that Bruce is the first coach, and you had retweeted it. And I was just like, what the hell is going on here? It was very odd to me.
But like I said, as I called around, people were saying this was the common refrain. Just another day that ends in Y. Why would this day be any different than any other for the Vancouver Canucks and how they do business? That was the answer. And I got to tell you, checking in with players on the team, they were none the wiser, like knew and were told nothing. This is hours after everyone is reporting, their GM has been fired, their coach has been fired. They only got a text message at a certain point that said, hey, here's what time we're meeting tomorrow and here's what time morning skate is. Like nothing ever happened.
That's odd. So now let's speak about the players, because I think if you look collectively at that group, they would say to a man that they've underachieved. That this team should be better than where they currently are in the standings.
On paper.
On paper. So Bruce Boudreau comes in. Did you hear from anyone? Like, was there a disconnect? Did this coaching change need to be made? Was the coach a part or a significant part of the underachieving early on this season of the Vancouver Canucks?
Well, I think first off, there was a lot of finger pointing. Like, it had clearly gone to a dark place in that when you hear Travis Green at a certain point in a press conference says, well, this is what we have, that's a pretty clear indictment of the general manager and the team that he's built. Him essentially throwing his hands up and saying, I can only play the hand that I'm dealt. And then I think, you look at it from the general manager perspective and they're like, well, we have Elias Pettersson, we have Brock Besser, we have Bo Horvat, JT Miller, Connor Garland, all these goals. We're not scoring. We play with no confidence. We can't defend worth a lick. And our goaltender, who was one of the best goalies in the league, has been left out to dry more nights than not. So they're looking at it saying, well, is there something that we could change in our structure, our system? How do we go about this? And they clearly weren't on the same page. So that's part of it. But what this coaching change tells me is that the big focus for the Canucks has to be on getting Pettersson going. And I think that's sort of the one thing you look at with Bruce Boudreau, and you go back and you go through his career. He's played the wheels off of his stars.
Oh, yeah.
Alex Ovechkin in Washington, go to Anaheim, Ryan Getzlaf and Corey Perry. Like, he has found a way to squeeze all the offense that he can out of his teams. His teams are generally really good in the neutral zone. It's been a while since the Canucks have had a real offensive minded push or focus. And so what I see in the coaching change, and the reason to make the coaching change, if you're going to sit in the ownership chair and say, I'm going to go out and hire my coach even before I have a general manager, that it would be to get and figure out what you have in Pettersson. Is he as good as the player that we saw in his entry-level contract? Is he not quite as good and we just, what we saw was an aberration? Or is it somewhere in between? And so I think that's the key question that you have to answer. And I think that's why, even in what looks like a lost season to everyone on the outside, that there's still a lot to figure out this year.
Oh, 100%. They're a team that's got to go better, which leads me to the obvious next question. We've gotten 2 bloody Sundays in a row, if we want to call it that, with Montreal and Vancouver. And I look around the league, Frank, and, I see a team, the Islanders, I don't think they're ready yet to pull the pin on their coaching staff just yet. But in your city, do you think there's is Alain Vigneault? Because a lot of people thought the Flyers would be more competitive than they've been. I know it's sometimes easy to just blame the coach, but do you think he's on thin ice or a hot seat?
I do. I think the temperature has risen significantly. I think you look at that loss to the Tampa Bay Lightning on Sunday night, awful. And this is a hard team to figure out, because I think you go back to last season and you say, there were a lot of oddities to the year. COVID, Carter Hart's out of his routine, doesn't look good, can't get a stop. Our goaltending stinks. We have a lot of injuries. We didn't adequately replace Matt Niskanen. Our defense isn't any good. We gave up way too much off the rush. Let's go out and make a whole ton of changes. And the Flyers did. Huge changes in terms of their roster construction. They've dealt with a lot of injuries this year, but that's not an excuse. I mean, Ellis has barely played, it feels like, barely scratched the surface. Ristolainen, he's only missed 2 games. Ellis has missed 18. And here's the thing that's confounding about the Flyers. is their goaltending had actually been, up until Sunday night, pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Carter Hart entered Sunday night with a .919 save percentage. The 5 goals that he gave up dropped it all the way down to .911. And so you can't point the finger at the goaltending anymore. So yes, they've missed Hayes. They've missed, Ellis for a couple games, Ristolainen for a few. But I don't think anyone expected the Flyers to be where they are in the standings, just ahead of the New York Islanders. They've lost 8 in a row in early December, and teams that I think they thought they should be head and shoulders above, the New Jersey Devils, the Columbus Blue Jackets, even the Pittsburgh Penguins, are all significantly ahead. And the Flyers have the second worst goal differential in the division. So all I can tell you is this: I'm never really one to sit here and bang the drum for a coaching change. I think it's the easy way out. But I think the Flyers have been stuck in this Alain Vigneault mode for a while, where they feel like they're stuck with him because, one, his contract was massive.
Yes.
5 years, $25 million. He still has $12.5 million to go. He's just about halfway through the deal. So I think the Flyers have resisted change for that part of it. They've resisted change because they didn't want to let the players off the hook. But there's no love lost there between the Flyers players and Alain Vigneault. Like, this was a coaching change that could have happened and maybe should have happened at the end of last season. And I know everyone would say, well, he still didn't even get a full 82 game season yet. Give him some rope. And I can tell you from talking to Flyers players and multiple, some, this is also going back to last year, some of them whom are no longer there. They feel like Alain Vigneault is arrogant, doesn't communicate well, and is someone that, for whatever reason, doesn't spend a lot of time communicating with his players. And they feel like it's a me first approach instead of a team first approach. Now, the other part of it is that the Flyers have 2 really experienced assistant coaches in Mike Yeo and Michel Therrien. And I think the players look around and they say, these are 2 guys that have previously been head coaches in the league. Who exactly is doing the work here? So I think there's a lot of finger pointing in terms of, is everyone on the same page? Is anyone actually putting in the work? And the Flyers are stuck in this spot where they've got a lot of work to do. Like, this season is kind of swirling down the drain at this point, given where they are in the standings.
Yeah, it's interesting when you said the Flyers were just ahead of the Islanders. If that had been a normal season, I think they'd say that was great, because a lot of people thought the Islanders would be at the top of the division. But when the Islanders are at the bottom division, it doesn't read nearly as well as you would hope. And it's funny, Frank. They're just listening to the comments from afar about the Flyers. I thought what you said, I thought at the end of last year, I'm like, man, the players and the coach don't seem to be on the same page. And communication is such a key in today's game. And I'll be, Michel Therrien, geez, every time I think of Therrien, I just think of him ripping the Pittsburgh defense
back in 2006.
Yeah. Oh, they say they care, but they don't care. Like, oh my God, it's that was
one of the great all-time press conferences.
Oh, so awesome, man. I still laugh about it, but they'd lost to the Oilers, so I get why he was frustrated, because the Oilers were terrible that
that team was a bunch of stiffs.
Yeah, or that decade, I guess we could say.
Yeah.
But you look at it now, and I think players require communication now more than ever. And communication can be direct. It can be like, hey, Pete, you need to do this. You're not playing well. End of discussion. Here we go. But if you don't say anything, right, that's not going to work. So I'm curious about the Flyers. That market has always been one where, they demand that they should be better. And I think a lot of people, Frank, like, you go back, and I know it was in the bubble, but Philly was the number 1 seed going to the bubble in 2020. That's not long ago. And since then, like, the wheels have just fallen off. It's really surprising. Like, I don't know. Last year, I had the Flyers as the most disappointing team in the NHL. And I get that COVID and people react differently. But now that's extended into this year. To me, that's just an extension of them being a big underachiever now for the past, how short last year was. It's still 56 games. Plus this year, they got to be right up there for the most disappointing team based on the talent that they have.
Yeah, I mean, their points percentage the last 2 seasons now, including the shortened year last year, it starts with a 4.
Oh.
So it's enough of a sample size to say, hey, wait a second, there's something that's off here. And I know why the Flyers haven't wanted to, but I just think it might be time. And you talk about a demanding fan base. I saw an interesting tweet. There's a statue of Ed Snyder outside of the Flyers arena. And it's actually right when you come out the doors as you're heading to the parking lot. And I saw a fan tweet on Sunday night. You wouldn't believe how many fans walked by on their way to the car begging for Ed to do something, because that's just something that would have happened at a certain point. And I think part of the frustration with the Flyers fan base is that they feel like this team has lost a bit of its identity since their owner died, since Comcast took over. It feels at times a little bit like a soulless corporate faceless franchise that doesn't have the same intensity, the same hunger and will to win as it previously did. And I think it's been off-putting for a lot of people in the marketplace that were used to that passion and that drive for so long that I don't think anyone would have stood for something like this.
Let's bring in Tyler Yaremchuk. We're going to talk about the Leafs and the Wild after, but let's bring in Tyler now. Ty, how you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic, and I'm locked and loaded with another edition of Buy or Sell. It's brought to you by our friends over at DoorDash. Ding dong, deliver DoorDash for dinner tonight. Use the promo code RundownDD. 25% off, no delivery fees on your first order. You like that ding dong, hey, Frank?
Yeah, that was nice touch.
Hey, you know what, Tyler? We could have a whole episode on people's phobia of ringing doorbells in 2021. God, I didn't know.
What?
It doesn't happen
Like
anymore.
they come to your house and they just knock. I'm like, ring the damn doorbell. If I'm downstairs, I'm not going to hear it. God, it annoys me. But anyway.
Wait, I have a confession to make. Should I do it now or after the buy?
No, do it now. Do it now.
Okay. So I made fun of you last episode about the pineapple barbecue sauce pizza.
Mm-hmm.
Just for shits and giggles on Sunday night, I ordered one just to see what it would be like. And I ate the first slice and I was like, oh God, this is gross. And then I was like, wait a second, that Gregor might be right.
Hey.
And I had a few more slices. I was like, you know what? Like I went bacon, pineapple, and barbecue sauce instead of tomato sauce. And it was
it's a game changer, man.
Not too shabby.
There you go.
I just want to get that off my chest.
Hey, honesty.
I apologize. I'm not totally converted, but I could see why people like it.
Hey, we're in a safe place here.
I'm a traditionalist.
Open things up. I love it.
All right, let's jump into things here. I'm setting the line at 2.5 more coaching changes this year. More than 2.5 coaching changes. Frank, you buying or selling on that before the end of the regular season?
More coaching changes or what we've seen already?
More, like 2.5 more between now and the end of the regular season.
I am gonna take the under. We already know that Dominic Ducharme is safe and is finishing out the year. Don Granato is not going anywhere in Buffalo. Detroit's been pretty good. Ottawa is a possibility. Arizona, no. Andre Tournier, first year. Seattle, no. First year. Vancouver already did it. LA, no. San Jose, no. Vegas, maybe. I could see the Pete DeBoer experiment going off the rails at a certain point, but some would argue that they've actually been pretty good given what they've had to deal with.
Yeah, right. I'm going to go under. I think Vigneault and Ottawa is the only other one that maybe would make a change. I think they look at their season and you know what? When you're part of a rebuild, having watched it up close for that long, when you put all your young guys in all key positions and you don't surround them with any veterans, you don't win. I don't care how talented your young players are. It's still not a young, like you can have young stars, but you need a lot of guys to support them. So maybe those two. So that's still under for me.
By the way, the other one that I will throw out there, if they somehow go into some, death spiral, I would think that Bruce Cassidy in Boston might be on the hot seat.
Now, this doesn't include after before July 1st?
No, we'll end it at the regular season. Yeah. We see it all the time where a team fires a coach and they get a big spark out of it. With this Canucks team, they have 57 games left. So I'm going to give you another over-under question. Over-under 57 points in those 57 games for the Vancouver Canucks, Jason?
I'll go over. I think Vancouver's underachieved big time. Just to be a 500 team isn't that hard in today's NHL, to be honest. So if they can't be 500 in points percentage, then they're more terrible than I thought. So no, I think they'll be well above that. I would say they'll be in the 60s, maybe even pushing high 60s.
So 57 plus the 18 they currently have would bring them to 75. The over-under for the season when it started in Vegas was 88.5. I say they're under that 57. I just think that I don't know that a coaching change is going to quickly right some of their wrongs. I don't have a lot of faith in the way that their defense is built. And if you can get Pettersson going, great. But I also think that they might have a couple interesting decisions to make at the trade deadline.
One team that doesn't need to make any changes right now, it's the Minnesota Wild. And you guys mentioned it. You want to talk about that big win over Toronto after this. But the Wild, as the best team in the Western Conference, I'm talking like a team that can be number one in the West when the regular season's done. You buying or selling on that idea, Frank?
Buying. And here's why. I don't think everyone realizes how well or how strong they were start to finish last season. That's a team that, was competitive all year long, took Vegas to Game 7. I don't know. I see the Minnesota Wild as a legitimate Stanley Cup contender.
It's hard not to like the Wild right now. Like I don't see any glaring weakness, or it's not like they're running on this hot streak of riding a specific player or, ridiculous special teams. They're just solid. I give Bill Guerin a lot of credit, man. Like Frank alluded to earlier about, bringing in GMs with experience. Hey man, maybe you give a guy, now Bill had some assistant GM experience, of course, but I think the NHL at times is guilty of always recycling the same old. Give some guys a new opportunity and you'll see what they can do at the right time. So I like the Wild a lot. They're not riding anything hot. So you know what? I would buy on that for sure. I like the Wild's team. For the first time in decades, man, like the Wild are a team that Bill Guerin's done the impossible. He has shed the image that the Wild are boring.
The Minnesota Mild.
I loved it when he was on the pod. He talked about it. He's like, yeah, we got to get rid of that. And give him credit, man. He has. Like, you watch the Wild. I watched that Toronto Wild game. Like, you couldn't have paid me to watch a Minnesota game years ago. Now I actually find myself channel surfing to find the Wild.
I would say one thing that they could potentially boost their team one spot. And what's been interesting about their group is they've been super balanced. Like you look at, they have 12 scorers with at least 10 points on their team. That's crazy. I would say the one sort of glaring weakness they have, and I would have been surprised to say it heading into the season, knowing how many teams liked him, is in backup goal, Capo Kakinen, sub 900 save percentage. Cam Talbot has gotten the lion's share of the workload, 18 of the 24 games, but Kakinen sub 900, I'd circle that as a potential spot where the Wild might want to consider upgrading.
Connor McDavid got a little wild in the game last night between the LA Kings and the Edmonton Oilers.
See what you did there.
Yeah. He gets a 5-minute major. We don't see a lot of 5-minute majors for boarding in the NHL, which I actually think is a bit of a problem. But did McDavid deserve a 5-minute major for that hit, Frank?
He deserved a 5-minute major for loss of control and temper. It was stupid. Does the hit itself deserve 5 minutes? I think yes. I think yes on 5-minute major, no on suspension.
Okay.
And I think you issue the penalty during the game, which I think that's the way it should work. They should get the call right the first time so that they don't feel like they need to tack on extra supplemental discipline for finishing the game.
Yeah, the hit drew blood on the face as Kempe as he smashed into the extension in the glass. That's a penalty. And I have been pushing for this for years. Just call it every time. That, to me, the only frustration is that they will call that against the league's best player when he delivers it, which I'm totally fine with, but you don't call it regularly enough, right? Just call the hits from behind and they'll eliminate themselves from the game. The problem is they keep allowing these to stick around. So it's the right call, just make it more consistent.
I think the other part for me is the force of it. Like if that was Zach Cassian delivering the same hit, we're talking about a significant injury probably. And because it's Connor McDavid, the force of it wasn't really that significant. And so that, I think that further, when you kind of go back and you reverse engineer, should this be a penalty or not? If it's someone else delivering it, yeah, we're talking about a multi-game suspension probably.
Well, he hit the stanchion, right? If you watch the replay, Kempe hit the stanchion, that caused the blood. If he's over 6 inches and there's no blood, I'm not sure. And some people might not like that.
Which again might be part of the problem too. Like you just need to call the action and not the result almost, right?
Hey, Ty, I'm with you, man. Yeah. And I think if they would just, hopefully this is the new standard. You did it against your best player. You said, okay, guess what? We're not picking sides here. We're going to call this regardless of who delivers it. If this is the new standard, I will applaud. But color me doubtful, boys. I don't see the NHL consistently calling this, sadly.
Fifth question, courtesy of our friends over at PointsBet. The New York Rangers, they got the best points percentage in their division, yet they're third on the PointsBet odds board to win that division at plus 250. The Rangers' ability to win that division this year. Jason, you buying or selling on it?
Yeah, I'm selling, man. Carolina and Washington are pretty good. And Carolina's gone a little through of a funk. You know, they've lost some of their defensemen to COVID. You know, Bear was out for a bit. Now Pesci's out. You know, those are some of their top guys. So I like the Rangers. I picked the Rangers to make the playoffs this year. They've had a great turnaround season. But Washington and Carolina, I think one of those two will trump them to finish first in the regular season.
You know what's interesting? My friend Micah Blake McCurdy, Ineffective Math on Twitter, he has all this stuff modeled out in terms of, you know, it's a complex formula in terms of how his model is constructed, but it basically looks at, you know, your team on paper plus your last 10 and 20 games and different stats. And then it sort of projects and simulates out the rest of the season. He has the Rangers winning the division in his model by less than a point. So he has Rangers 1, Carolina 2, a close second, and then Washington a bit back in terms of points. So is it possible? Yes. My money would still be on Carolina because for the reasons Jay mentioned, I just think that team's really good. But New York has been a pleasant surprise.
There you go. That'll wrap up another edition of Buy or Sell, brought to you by DoorDash.
Well, hey, if Shesterkin's out for any extended period of time, Frank, that's a big loss, man. That guy's been playing unbelievable.
But they say he can be back in a week, so.
Yeah, well, that's good because, any longer than that. And that was I was watching that. It was such an odd injury. Like, no one really touched him. He just extended himself, although he's flat on his back, and it clearly was his right leg somewhere. But, yeah, you hope he's not out. Now, the Toronto-Minnesota game, Minnesota gets up 3-0. The Maple Leafs storm back. They tied. They ended up losing that one. Then they go into Winnipeg on Blake Wheeler, 1,000 game night, and they end up losing. Teams are going to lose 2 in a row. I don't make much of that. But the Minnesota Wild, Frank, I know we talked a little bit there with Tyler, but the Wild, and it's funny. You got Florida, the Rangers, and the Wild right now as the 3 top teams in points percentage. And Florida, I think, was expected to be there. The other teams we thought would be competitive, I think we both picked them to make the playoffs. But who's a bigger surprise or more impressive to you, the Rangers or the Wild?
Probably the Rangers, because I thought the Wild had a chance to be really good. I was unconvinced of the Rangers. And I think what's still amazing about the Rangers is that they've taken this huge step forward without really getting a lot more from Capo Caco or Alexis Lafreniere. And that's kind of been my big point for New York is what happens when those guys finally get going? I think, we all were wondering heading into the season, can Adam Fox do it again? Like he could well win the Norris again. He's been that good for the New York Rangers. Chris Kreider's been unbelievable, 16 goals in 23 games. Like, this team has the top end firepower. They're getting the goaltending and they've got a Norris Trophy winner on their blue line. Like there's not a lot to not like. It's just my question as you get to the playoffs is the depth. Do they have the depth scoring to continue in the playoffs? And that's sort of the one real question mark because I think they're a bit top heavy.
Yeah, I'll say this about the Norris. Unless Cale Makar misses too many games to injury, he's winning.
I'm with you. You watch him. The way he plays is ridiculous.
Crazy how good he's been. But hey, speaking of Colorado, I'm gonna be watching very closely on what Joe Sakic does in the next few months. they need another goalie. Like Kemper, Frank, when he's healthy, he's a pretty good goaltender. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. That's been an issue for a few years. Their backup goalie right now is good enough. Now, Colorado's making the playoffs. It's not that dire of a situation, but I wonder, even if they go out to get a goalie who can be a 1A for them, because there's not many legit starters available. You got Fleury in Chicago, and then after that, like, I don't think they're going to go after Varlamov potentially, right? They let him walk, and he's got a long-term contract there. So I wonder if a guy like Korpisalo, who I don't think's the number one, but I think is a much better backup than what they currently have with the injury issues of Kemper, if Joe Sakic maybe jumps on the goalie market sooner than we thought.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of reasons, and it's not just for the backup spot. It's also like Kemper's in the final year of his deal and is a pending UFA. Like, there's no guarantee that, given the average season he's had, given the injuries, that they even bring him back next year. So it's not even like you're worried about upsetting your number one guy. I think you have to look at this season for the Colorado Avalanche and you say, we're all hands on deck here. I hate the term all in, but we're going to do everything we can to give this team a chance to win. And if that includes bringing in a Marc-Andre Fleury on a temporary run, so be it. I think that's one really intriguing situation if you're sitting in Marc-Andre Fleury's world saying, hey, I moved my family to Chicago, took a chance. It hasn't worked out. I'm looking to set down roots somewhere. Don't know where it'll be. Man, it would be awesome to go take a run in Colorado and see if we could win. And in a lot of ways, I feel like Marc-Andre Fleury could be the modern day, the 20-year later version of Ray Bourque. This guy that's, obviously has won a Stanley Cup previously, but is sort of on this quest to, regain or be the center of attention as they win the cup. Like, you think back to 2008, 2009, when Pittsburgh went on their runs, it was about Sid and Malkin. And now you think back to Pittsburgh's run, the back-to-back cups, and it was Matt Murray, the guy that at the end of the day was the one starting in net the night Pittsburgh won. I think there's this quest for Marc-Andre Fleury, and I think a lot of people rooting for him around the league to go out and win the Stanley Cup on his own merit.
Now, Frank, I got another topic I want to get to, but I see you're on your phone. It looks like you were tweeting something. What's going on?
Yeah, some breaking news here as we're doing the pod. I'm told that the Flyers are making a coaching change. Alain Vigneault is out. Still working on details as to who is coming in. My sense is that one of their assistant coaches, Mike Yeo, will be taking over on an interim basis. Don't know if that's the permanent full-time, if he's the interim, but it seems like Yeo is going to be the guy behind the bench, at least tonight, coaching the team. They're in a back-to-back scenario against the Colorado Avalanche.
So, what we talked about this earlier in the pod, that we thought, hey, if there was one guy around the league who would be on a short list, and you talked about how the players and the coach, obviously you had some good intel on that, and it comes to be true within the actual pod. So that's a first on the rundown, that what we talked about earlier actually happens before the pod's over. I want to get you this one. I know it's very early, so I don't know if you've had any time to think about it, but a guy we just had on the show, Frank, they just honored him. He's on the Wall of Honor. He's beloved in Philadelphia. You said Yo is an interim. I'm not sure he's the long-term answer. Maybe. What about a guy like Rick Tocchet? Can he come home to Philly? Is that just me connecting emotional dots, or do you think there's a shot?
No, I think there's a real shot. I think it's been pretty quiet up to this point. But I could think of no better fit for the Flyers. You talk about energy, you talk about communication. He was on the pod a few weeks ago talking about how he communicates with players. You talk about connection to fan base. That's something that would rejuvenate this fan base, that would get people excited, get people fired up. And I also happen to think Rick Tocchet's a really good coach. So it's the perfect scenario, the perfect fit for me. We'll see what Chuck Fletcher's thinking.
Well, Frank, clearly the ghost of Ed Snyder, as people who are Flyer fans, some of them are going to be like, Ed, do something. Then it happened. They're going to be talking to Ed now all the time.
Well, they should, because this team has not been the same since he passed.
No, it's not good. Well, I know you got to get running, Frank, on that. Quickly, one thing to look at this week, we'll find out how real the Oilers are. They take on the Wild, the Hurricanes, the Bruins, and the Maple Leafs in their next 4 home games. And we'll see where it goes from there. They've got a lot to clean up 5-on-5, and their starts have been brutal this season, which wasn't an issue the last 2 years. They had the 9th best first goal scoring percentage in the NHL the first 2 years, but this year they've cratered to near the bottom of the NHL. And it's a problem that has to be fixed. So we'll get on that. And I know you'll have more on the Daily Face-Off show coming up at noon Eastern.
This week, I'll be at the Board of Governors meetings as well in Florida. So I'll be doing the pod Friday from Florida. I'm sure there's going to be lots of Olympic talk and also talk about the Chicago Blackhawks and their fallout still.
Yes, and maybe Jack Eichel early return. We'll get to all of that. Have a good one, Frank. Good work on the Vigneault break.
Thanks for listening to the DFO Rundown with Saravalli and Gregor. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode. Delivered by DoorDash.